He became a key figure in symphonic metal through his work with Nightwish. His writing relied on structured composition, emphasizing orchestral elements within a modern metal framework. As the band's audience expanded internationally, his role in defining the genre became increasingly visible. This is the story of Tuomas Holopainen. Tuomas was born on December 25, 1976, in the small Finnish town of Kaiti. The town's quiet structure and close community shaped his early years. Classical music was frequently played at home, and from an early age, he grew accustomed to orchestral sound palettes. Although his family did not pursue music professionally, his environment allowed him to develop a natural connection to structured, melodic forms. Around the age of 7, Tuomas began formal piano lessons through the local music school system. Finland's public music education model emphasized discipline and theory, giving students a strong technical base. His studies soon expanded to include clarinet and foundational music theory. These lessons introduced him to harmony, rhythm, and structured notation, forming the technical groundwork he relied on throughout his later career. His training followed a consistent schedule, reinforcing his ability to analyze music rather than only play it. As he moved into his early teens, he became increasingly interested in orchestral composition. Traditional piano studies continued, but his attention shifted toward understanding how larger arrangements were constructed. This interest eventually led him toward film music. Tuomas focused on how themes were developed, how sections transitioned, and how orchestral layers created atmosphere. These observations helped him break away from instrument-specific thinking and see music as an interconnected structure. A defining moment in his early life came in 1993, when he traveled to the United States for a one-year high school exchange program in Kansas. During this period, he was exposed to a broader range of music than he had access to in Finland. He participated in orchestra classes, experienced ensemble rehearsals with larger groups, and encountered contemporary film scores more directly. The year abroad gave him practical insight into how orchestral parts functioned together, how arrangements were executed in rehearsal settings, and how scoring techniques were applied in modern compositions. When he returned to Finland in 1994, his musical direction had become clearer. He began keeping structured notebooks filled with melodic themes, chord progressions, and rhythmic ideas. These notebooks were not casual sketches, but organized attempts to explore and refine musical concepts. They became part of his regular routine and formed an early archive of material he would later revisit. This habit of documenting ideas consistently became one of the defining aspects of his creative process. In the years that followed, Holopainen played with several local bands. The projects differed in style. Some focused on rock, others on acoustic arrangements, but none aligned fully with the sound he envisioned. These experiences, however, provided practical knowledge about ensemble performance, rehearsal discipline, and adapting parts for different instrument combinations. While useful, the bands offered a contrast that pushed him further toward developing a project built around his own ideas rather than fitting into an existing framework. By the mid-1990s, Holopainen's musical identity had taken shape. He had a classical foundation, a growing interest in atmospheric and cinematic textures, and first-hand experience working with orchestral ensembles during his year in the United States. Combining these elements led him toward the idea of creating a project that merged acoustic elements with the scale and emotional depth of film-influenced composition. This period formed the conceptual base that would guide his transition into the next stage of his career, where these early ideas would begin to evolve into structured, professionally recorded work. After returning to Finland in 1994, Tuomas settled into a calmer and more predictable daily routine. While continuing his education, most of his time was spent at home, structured around individual activities rather than public or professional engagements. This period was not defined by live performances or recording sessions, but by personal work and private routines. His days were divided between music-related work, reading, and time spent alone. Music creation during these years remained a solitary process. His work did not move toward a defined goal such as an album, arrangement, or recording plan. Melodic ideas and harmonic structures were examined on their own terms. Material that did not function as intended was discarded without being archived, while only selected ideas were kept for further development. This approach gradually made his writing process more selective and focused. He was cautious about sharing his music during this time. Most of what he wrote stayed within his personal workspace. On occasion, some ideas were played in informal settings, but these moments did not develop into ongoing group activity. The purpose was not performance, but observation, seeing how written material translated into sound outside of the piano. Reading formed a consistent part of his daily life alongside music. Fantasy literature was among the genres he followed. In addition, topics related to natural sciences and evolutionary theory were part of his broader reading interests. In later interviews, Tuomas has described a broader interest in learning about ideas beyond music, including topics related to natural history. This interest was described not as an academic pursuit, but as part of a personal curiosity and a desire to learn beyond music. Comic books were another regular part of his free time. Disney comics, particularly the Scrooge McDuck stories written by Don Rosa, were among the material he followed closely. These stories stood out to him for their long-form narratives and structured chronology. This interest remained separate from his musical work and continued purely as a reading habit. Cinema also played a role in how he spent his time away from music. His viewing habits leaned toward films with strong narrative structure and atmosphere. Disney films and story-driven productions were among the content he followed. These films were approached as viewer experiences rather than as technical or professional references. Over time, a clear daily framework took shape. Music writing, reading, and film viewing progressed as separate activities, each occupying its own place within his routine. Together, they formed a sustainable structure for working alone over extended periods. By the mid-1990s, the limitations of this independent approach became more apparent. While a substantial amount of material had been developed, it was increasingly clear that further progress would require a different working environment. This realization laid the groundwork for the next stage, although no immediate change occurred at this point. In 1996, Tuomas Holopainen began taking steps that moved his work beyond private writing and informal rehearsal. After a period of acoustic experimentation, he started preparing material intended specifically for recording. These compositions were no longer treated as sketches or tests, but as pieces meant to be documented in a fixed form. This shift marked the beginning of a transition from personal practice into structured production. The first recording sessions took place in modest studio conditions. The goal was not polish or commercial presentation, but clarity, capturing arrangements accurately enough to evaluate structure, pacing, and vocal placement. These early sessions established a working method that combined keyboard-driven composition with layered instrumentation. The recording served as reference material rather than finished releases, allowing adjustments to be made before committing to larger sessions. During this period, the lineup solidified into a functioning recording group. Tuomas worked closely with vocalist Tarja Turunen and guitarist Empu Vuorinen, while additional musicians were brought in to complete rhythm and percussion roles for studio work. Each member's role was defined by the requirements of the compositions, rather than by fixed band identities. The focus remained on completing recordings, rather than developing a public-facing group image. By early 1997, preparation began for a full-length album. Recording sessions were scheduled with the intention of producing a complete release rather than isolated tracks. The material reflected a departure from the earlier acoustic emphasis, incorporating electric guitars, percussion, and broader arrangements. These sessions required decisions about song order, arrangement consistency, and final structure. Choices that marked a clear step into professional production. Later that year, the album Angels Fall First was recorded and completed. The process involved multiple studio sessions and collaboration with a producer to finalize the sound. The release introduced the project under the name Nightwish and established a public identity for the work. While modest in scope, the album represented the first time Tuomas's compositions were formally released to an audience. Following the album's completion, promotional and logistical steps were taken to support its release. These included label coordination and preparation for limited live performances. The music was no longer confined to studio evaluation. It now existed as a finished product available for distribution. This change required adapting arrangements for performance while keeping them aligned with the recorded versions. The release of Angels Fall First also led to adjustments in how new material was written. Compositions developed after the album took into account recording constraints and performance feasibility from the outset. Writing sessions increasingly assumed that pieces would be recorded and performed rather than remaining purely conceptual. By the end of 1997, work had already begun on new material intended for a second album. Studio planning, rehearsal scheduling, and compositional development overlapped as the project moved forward. The foundation established through the first release made it possible to approach subsequent recordings with clearer expectations and defined objectives. This period concluded with the project fully transitioned into professional music production. Recording, release preparation, and structured collaboration had replaced informal experimentation. The groundwork was set for more extensive studio work to follow, marking the end of the initial entry into recorded and released material. Following the initial album release and early performances, the internal structure of Nightwish entered a period of reassessment. As activity increased, the informal working model used during the early recording phase proved insufficient. Decisions regarding scheduling, representation, and long-term direction required clearer authority and coordination. During this period, Tuomas Holopainen assumed responsibility for organizing compositional planning and defining how material would be developed moving forward. As new albums were prepared and released in the years that followed, differences emerged regarding the management of the band's public and professional operations. Touring schedules, media obligations, and contractual matters placed increasing pressure on internal communication. These issues were not related to musical ability, but to expectations surrounding workload distribution, decision-making authority, and external representation. By the early 2000s, these differences had become more pronounced. Conflicting views developed between band members regarding how the project should be managed and who should speak on its behalf in professional contexts. Attempts were made to continue working within the existing structure, but the underlying disagreements remained unresolved. The situation reached a critical point during the touring cycle that followed the Once album. After the completion of the final show of that tour in 2005, a decision was taken to remove vocalist Tarja Turunen from the band. The decision was communicated through an open letter addressed to her, which was subsequently made public. Tuomas Holopainen was directly involved in the drafting and delivery of this statement, taking responsibility for formally expressing the band's position. The removal of a long-standing member required immediate structural changes. Scheduled commitments were canceled or adjusted, and plans for future recordings were placed on hold while the lineup was reconsidered. The band entered a transitional period focused on stabilizing its internal framework before resuming activity. In 2006, the selection process for a new vocalist began. This process involved auditions and internal evaluations rather than public announcements. The goal was to establish a working relationship compatible with the existing compositional structure and future touring demands. Annette Olzon was selected later that year, marking a significant shift in the band's lineup and public identity. The first album recorded with the new lineup, Dark Passion Play, was released in 2007. The recording process reflected a deliberate effort to move forward without revisiting previous internal disputes. The album's completion re-established a functioning production cycle and allowed postponed touring plans to resume. Despite the successful release, internal adjustments continued. Differences in working style and long-term expectations persisted within the group. In 2012, during an ongoing tour, Annette Olzon departed from the band. The separation occurred abruptly, requiring immediate logistical decisions to fulfill remaining performance obligations. Floor Jansen was brought in as a temporary replacement for the remainder of the tour and was later confirmed as a permanent member. This change finalized a new lineup structure that remained in place afterward. By the end of this period, Nightwish had undergone multiple structural disruptions, each requiring direct intervention and decision-making. Tuomas Holopainen remained responsible for maintaining continuity through these transitions, ensuring that recording and touring commitments could proceed despite internal change. The band emerged from this phase with a stabilized lineup and a revised internal framework, bringing this period of restructuring to a close. After the lineup stabilized with Floor Jansen as vocalist, Tuomas returned to album production with a clearly defined working structure. Writing for the next release began with material developed specifically for studio recording rather than adaptation from live arrangements. This approach led into the creation of Endless Form's Most Beautiful, released in 2015. The album marked a documented thematic focus on evolution and natural history. Its title was taken from Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, and the album booklet included direct quotations from Darwin's writings. Recording sessions incorporated orchestral elements alongside traditional metal instrumentation, with narration by biologist Richard Dawkins appearing on the closing track. These elements were planned during the writing phase rather than added during production. Following the album's release, touring was conducted using arrangements prepared during recording, minimizing changes between studio and stage versions. After the completion of the touring cycle, work on new material began without changes to the lineup or production approach. In 2020, Nightwish released Human Nature, a double album structured in two distinct parts. The first disc consisted of conventional metal compositions, while the second was an orchestral work performed without guitars, bass, or drums. The orchestral portion was written as a continuous piece rather than separate tracks, requiring coordination with full orchestra and conductor during recording. During this period, Holopainen continued writing independently, separating composition from rehearsal and performance planning. Studio work followed pre-defined arrangements, allowing recording sessions to proceed without structural revision. The album's release coincided with global touring restrictions, which resulted in the cancellation of planned live performances for the material. After touring resumed, Nightwish returned to live performances using adapted arrangements for the material that had not previously been performed on stage. No changes were made to the lineup or writing structure during this phase. In 2024, the band released Yesterwind. Writing for the album followed the same method used for the two previous releases, with compositions completed before studio sessions began. The album continued the use of orchestral arrangements integrated directly into the writing process, rather than treated as supplementary layers. By the time of this release, Holopainen had completed multiple consecutive albums using the same production model. Each project moved through writing, orchestration, recording, and release without structural interruption. As of the mid-2020s, work on future material continued within this established framework, with no announced changes to lineup or creative roles.